Episode 23, The How Show. You now know your why, now you need to know how. You are listening to episode number 23 of Mike Murphy Unplugged. Learn, create, move forward. I am your host, Mike Murphy. I'm a one-man band. I'm a technology junkie. I love helping people figure things out. And I am really excited to be here with you today. The goal of Mike Murphy Unplugged is to help you learn what you need to know in order to create online content so you can move forward in business and in life. And in today's episode number 23, I have 7 simple steps for how you can get started and launch your podcast in 2016. Let's start the show with a question of the week from Ask Mike Anything. And for those of you just tuning into the show for the first time, Ask Mike Anything. It's your chance to ask me what you want to know more about or where you're struggling in your online business. Just head on over to mikemurphy.co. Leave me a question, leave me a voicemail, and I'll answer it on a future episode. Today's Ask Mike Anything comes from fellow podcaster and friend Dr. Vivian Carrasco. Take it away, Vivian.
Hey, Mike Murphy, it's Vivian Carrasco with the Love Being Human, Turning Inward podcast. I have a question that I'd like to ask you about. I'm rebranding, getting into a new format, and I want to give folks a teaser, maybe a few words or a snippet that on different platforms that would then lead them to the podcast. What do you suggest? Thanks for your help.
Well, thank you, Vivian, and I may just have the perfect solution for you. My suggestion is to check out one of my new favorite and intriguing tools, and that is Clamor. I think this tool has incredible potential for podcasters. Clamor is a web app and an iOS app that enables you to share up to 24-second audio snippets from anything you're listening to. It's kind of like the Twitter of audio. For example, if I'm listening to one of my favorite podcasts or my own, and I hear a great quote, I can clamor the section of the podcast I find interesting and share it on all my social media channels instantly. Clamor makes this really easy, and what's cool is that it automatically pulls all the metadata so the podcast thumbnail and the show notes travel with the snippet. So when someone's listening to the clip, they have the opportunity to go listen to the entire podcast. Fun and powerful marketing. Check out clamor.com for a really great app, something I'm excited about. And Vivian, I think this tool is exactly what you're looking for to get people excited about the rebranding and relaunch of your podcast. And I wish you the best of luck with it. So let's jump into episode number 23, as I have a lot to share with you. In last week's episode, I shared my why for starting a podcast, and I gave you 10 reasons why you should start a podcast in 2016. In today's episode, I want to show you how in 7 simple steps. Henry Ford said, "You can't build a reputation on what you are going to do." As creatives, coming up with the ideas and the concepts is the fun and easy part. We are dreamers. But to take the next step in moving forward is the challenge. Finding your why is a huge step in the right direction. Now let me show you how to move forward with launching your podcast. Number 1, pick a launch date. This was huge for me because I need accountability in order to get things done. Reliability and dependability are 2 of my greatest strengths, but I need to put myself on the hook in order to follow through with something. So get a coach or a mentor or some sort of accountability partner, whether it's just your friend, and tell them you're starting a podcast on April 1st or whatever the date is, and that you're excited, but you have a lot of work to do to launch it. Let them know that you're in this. This is going to stick in your head, and it's going to give you something to work towards. This is a psychological trick that really works for me. If I commit to a date, I find a way to get it done. I like this concept known as Parkinson's Law. If you give yourself 6 months to launch a podcast, it's going to take you 6 months. If you give yourself 6 weeks, you're going to find a way to get it done in 6 weeks. Push yourself. It's worth it. Here's some actionable tips. Put the launch date on a Google Calendar. For me, I wanted to release my episodes on a Friday, so I looked at the calendar for a Friday in the following month that seemed possible, and that became my deadline. Pick the start date that makes sense for you, and from that time on, the adrenaline, the excitement, and the fear kicks in almost immediately after this step. and listen to yourself. Is this something you really want to do? Are you willing to commit to it? If so, let's keep moving forward. I recommend 4 to 6 weeks for the one-man bands and 8 to 10 weeks minimum if starting an interview show. I launched my show with 4 weeks of deciding to start a podcast, and while I got it done, I think it was a little fast. If your technical skills are not advanced, you may want to give yourself more time. Don't underestimate how much work is involved in starting a podcast. I was fortunate in that I could do almost everything myself, but you might need more time to outsource and learn the technical side more, so make sure your starting date is practical. Push yourself, but be realistic. Interview shows require much more time because you need to batch the interviews in advance and store them up, since you are at the mercy of other people's schedules. For me, I can record anytime. If your show has guests, be prepared and have several in the bank. This is going to require time. Number 2, plan. I think I confessed in the roadmap show that I'm really not good at writing plans or to-do lists, but you need to make a checklist if you're going to get your podcast launched smoothly and meet your deadline. Here's an actionable step. Start a Google Doc. Or if you're an Evernote person, same thing. Whatever your note-taking and idea-snatching tool of choice is, start one master file that is your action plan. And everything you think of related to or starting your podcast goes here. Everything. Notes, ideas, resources, future topics, hosting companies, whatever. This is also going to serve as a good teaching tool later. See, I'm telling you this because I wish I had documented my steps just a little bit better. I told you I'm not good at writing things down. I am getting much better because I know how valuable and how much of a time saver this is later on. Do it. Write down everything you do needed to launch. It is worth the effort, and it makes it so much easier as you're going through the checklist. Okay, number 3, learn, study, do your homework. By the time you decide to start a podcast, you should have already started your research and poking around online about how to start a podcast and why, etc. But once you pick your launch date, kick the research and the learning into high gear. There are a lot of moving parts and technical steps, and you really need to start to understand the terminology and get an idea of the technical steps that make sense for you. This learning stage is constant while you are preparing for the launch, and you can add them all to your action plan, all the resources like gear and hosting services and design consideration. You're also going to need to look at the competition in your space. What is working for them? What is not? Find inspiration everywhere. But make sure that you really stay focused on this learning part. Action steps, places to learn. Here and with me. Hopefully this podcast has provided you with helpful resources to guide you throughout the technical decisions. Be sure to revisit some of my earlier episodes, such as episode 4. I went through all the steps to launch, and then my gear and tool shows will give you a little bit more of the gear that I use. Other great resources with tons of knowledge. Dave Jackson, The School of Podcasting, one of the best. Daniel J. Lewis from the Audacity Podcast has tons of resources. Ray Ortega from the Podcaster Studio, I've learned a ton from him. Cliff Ravenscraft, the Podcast Answer Man. Pat Flynn has a full step-by-step guide to launching video or a podcast with videos. John Lee Dumas has a free 12-step podcasting course on iTunes. All good places. With the deadline in place, stay focused. Your action plan from step 2 is going to guide you. This is going to be fast-paced and at times overwhelming, but it's what it takes. Number 4, pick a topic. This has many parts and not easy if you're a jack of all trades or an introvert or not a specialist in anything. But think hard on this one. If you already know exactly what your podcast is going to be about, great. If not, I have some tips to get you on your way. Actionable tip number 1. Ignore the naysayers who say you do not do anything without having a niche. Having a niche is probably a better recipe for success, but having the courage to get started and figure out what your specialty is as you go, which is exactly what I did, this is the only way I could get started, and I'm okay with that. I would still be without a podcast if I waited until I could narrow down my niche. Number 2, really listen and learn about yourself. What excites you? What do you like to talk about or be around? Don't ask others for advice on this. Be honest with yourself. You know. Don't be embarrassed or concerned with what others will think. I like to talk about software and gear. Some people hate it. You don't need validation to pick your topic. You need a topic that you are really passionate about and that you think you will provide some value to your listeners, whether it be educational or entertaining. Be excited about your topic. Know your topic. You have to be good at what you're talking about, and the rest will shape itself out over time. Once you zero in on a topic or your area of expertise, really expand on it and develop it. Try to formulate your own roadmap or direction you see taking the podcast. Once you start a podcast, you are taking the listeners on a journey. Where do you see the topic leading them? Sounds kind of goofy, but you need to spend a lot of time about the topic and the content. I think the content part of launching a podcast is often downplayed, and I've said this before, but in my opinion, it is the key to everything. Put a lot of energy and effort in this part. Number 5, pick a format. Go to episode number 21 if you need a refresher, where I talked all about the formats in depth. You are basically deciding on whether to do a solo cast, an interview show, storytelling, or a mixed bag. And warning, don't pick a format just because it seems like the best way to attract a larger audience, or it seems like a popular and trending format. Pick a format that works with you. Serial and NPR storytelling shows are great. They're very popular, and I would be horrible at this format. Listen to your gut. Don't be tempted by the trends and what everyone else is doing. Podcasting is a long game, and everything about your podcast needs to be true to your style and your personality and your work habits. You are probably like myself and 99% of the others starting a podcast. You probably have a full-time job. You might have a family with kids and dogs and cats. These are all considerations you have to consider when choosing a format. Action steps for this part. Know yourself. What format fits your style? For me, I like the one-man band style because I'm independent in nature. You may have more of a need for human interaction, and interview format's going to be perfect for you. Know your content. What format makes the most sense for your content? How can you deliver the most value? Which format is going to give you the best platform to make your content its best? Know your audience. What format is going to resonate best with them? Number 6 in this process, commit to a schedule. I'm talking about the frequency of episodes here. Will you do a daily podcast, twice a week, 3 times a week, weekly, every other week, monthly? While I know this is kind of part of the format part of things, I thought this deserved its own step because it's so important. Consistency is everything, in my opinion, and you really need to give this a lot of thought to what you're capable of committing to and stick to it. Do not take this part lightly, and if it scares you or you're unsure if you can keep the schedule, you may want to reconsider whether starting a podcast is the right move for you at this time in your journey. I don't mean to sound harsh or negative, but this is a big one. Once you pick and decide on the schedule, you owe it to your listeners to deliver without fail. This is a big responsibility that a lot of people underestimate, but you'll be fine if you stay realistic and do it for the right reasons and you have your plan in hand, which we're getting there. Action steps for the scheduling. Take all things into consideration, including the format, your audience, and most importantly, your life. And ask, how often do you want to release a new episode? Or can you release a new episode is probably a better thing. Ask yourself, how much time do I really have to prepare, write, produce a podcast? Be realistic. My episode is only 18 minutes long. I spend 4 to 6 hours researching and writing my script. I spend another 1 to 2 hours recording and editing, 1 hour for the show notes and blog posts, including artwork prep, and then another hour for promoting on social and all that. That's like 10 hours of actual physical work. And then the rest of my week of every free moment is reading about podcasting and scouring social media and engaging with others and hosting my 3 to 5 hour weekly blab on podcasting. And then I'm listening to podcasts in between my walks and my exercising. So, how many episodes can I handle while working full time and doing all this? Well, for me, 1 per week is plenty. Be realistic and think long term. How long can you keep up the pace? You don't want to be another pod fade statistic. You may only have time for one per month, and that is just fine. Just stick to it. Once you tell your audience what your schedule is, deliver. And the final of my 7 steps to get you from why to how, goals and roadmap. This last step can come first. It can come in the middle, come in the end. It's going to always be there, and it's going to always be evolving. But it is critical that you understand your answers at all stages, especially at the beginning. This is really simple and should be closely related to your why, but you need to understand the big picture goals and ask yourself, what do you want this podcast to do for you? What do you want your podcast to do for your audience? Do you want to make a living with this? Do you want it to be 100% hobby? Just define what the goals are of your podcast before you get into it too far. And this is going to always keep you motivated and going to keep you clear on what you're doing this for. The more you understand your goals, intentions, and the purpose of starting the podcast, the better off you're going to be and the more set up you are going to be for success in the long term. So in conclusion, I shared 7 steps today to get you from the idea stage to the launch stage. Number 1, pick a launch date. Number 2, create a master document. Number 3, do your homework. Learn the steps cold and find inspiration from your competition. Number 4, define your topic and content. Number 5, choose a format. Number 6, commit to a publishing schedule and stick to it. And number 7, define your long-term goals for you and for your audience. This list is only the tip of the iceberg. There is a lot to do. But if you adopt some or all of these steps, you are going to be off to a very good start. I started this podcast with much the same approach, and I added what I wish I would have done. My goal in today's episode was just to give you a little bit of motivation and to give you some actionable steps that you can start applying right away. As always, I'm here for you if you need any help. If you need help discovering your voice or moving forward or learning the tools of the trade, head on over to mikemurphy.co, sign up for the newsletter, and you'll be on the list. I thank you for joining me today as always. I hope you could join my one-man band, and together we can learn, create, and move forward. Cheers.